Well, today, as should be clear from all the decorations and the trees and stuff on the slides, we are beginning the season of creation, which is a relatively new 5-week time in the church year to help us focus on one of the major issues of our time, our treatment of and relationship with God's creation. And this year, our focus starts with forests. Now, we tend to think of forests. I guess having put in the slides, it would help if I actually... yeah, there we go. We tend to think of forests as kind of big areas of trees, and there's no doubt that the abundance of trees is what makes it a forest and not, say, a marsh or a prairie. But even though forests are made up of trees, there's a lot more to a forest than just trees. Forests are a complex, interdependent ecosystem of various types of plants and animals and birds and reptiles and amphibians and insects and bugs and bacteria and fungi. Fungi are very, very important to forests. And of course, trees. All of which are vital to the health and functioning of the forest as a whole. As science has continued to study the ecology of forests, we are coming to see the amazing complexity in what we once thought of as just a bunch of trees, which is why tree farms are not forests. Now, you may be wondering why we're talking about forests in our worship. And the answer is because our relationship with creation has everything to do with our faith. Everything exists in this universe exists because of our Creator God. Everything that exists on this planet, all the complexity and diversity and interrelatedness of our wonderful world is a gift of our Creator God. And how we treat it is a spiritual issue as much as it is a practical one. Now, there's a whole branch of theology that's referred to under the heading of eco-spirituality or eco-theology. It's about our relationship with the earth and with non-human life. Eco-theology is about changing the fundamental way we think about our relationship with the earth and the non-human creatures that we share this planet with. And this has come about as an area of study because in our highly technological way of life, we've largely lost our sense of connection with the natural interactions and forces that support life on this planet. But this psychological distance doesn't in any way lessen our connection and our dependence on nature or on the impact that we are having on the rest of God's world. Just think about the increase in forest fires and hurricanes that are being caused by climate change. And so we're being increasingly forced to acknowledge the problems that our lack of connection is creating. And sadly, our worldview and the way we have been living out our faith is in self part of the reason that we as a society haven't been responsible stewards of God's earth. Now, as a species, our relationship with the earth took something of a left turn about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago when we invented agriculture. We discovered that we could, at least in some ways, master nature. and bend the environment to our will. And we began the process of mentally separating ourselves from the other animals. And then eventually, as civilizations grew and we began to live in more urban environments, we began to think of ourselves as actually separate from the earth. Here in the Western world, by the dawn of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution a few hundred years ago, our mental and emotional separation from nature was complete. We stopped thinking about the earth as part of God's sacred mystery, filled with divine spirit, and instead saw it as raw materials for our own desires. Everything that wasn't human was declared to be devoid of spirit or any spark of the divine. The world belonged to us as we saw it. God had given it to us to do with as we liked. And we saw ourselves as the pinnacle of all creation, the owners of all we surveyed. And although this is not universally true among all the peoples of the world, and it's beginning to change as we recognize the harm that this worldview has done, this is still the prevailing worldview of our culture. And it's still the worldview that drives the worldwide economy, the extraction of resources from the earth, the laws protecting or failing to protect animals and plants and oceans and forests and even other humans who can be seen to be of less value. We have put a price on everything without knowing its value or its place or its purpose in God's intricate and interrelated creation. But this is not just a practical problem. It's not simply a problem of fixing our usage and our lifestyle choices. This is a deeply spiritual issue. For one thing, this narrow me-first worldview doesn't fit at all with the way Jesus taught. Jesus teaches that greatness is found in serving others, not in dominating them. His radical concern for the poor and the exploited was at the forefront of his actions. While Jesus' spirituality was not what we would recognize as explicitly ecological in the modern sense of that term, because the people of his time didn't yet see themselves as completely separate from creation, his spirituality was nonetheless grounded in a profound sense of the generosity of God as observed through the workings of nature. And I strongly suspect that if Jesus were walking the earth today, he would have a lot to say about the way we abuse God's creation. So, what are we to do? The sad truth is that when the news is full of seemingly insurmountable problems like COVID and forest fires and climate change and wars and brutality and all kinds of horrifyingly depressing stuff, it's really, really easy to just turn away and end up doing nothing. Faced with insurmountable problems, this is a natural tendency. We lose hope. And we just turn away and we don't do what we can do to help. But we can change the way we do things. The changes aren't happening as fast as we need, but change is happening. Even the governments who were so opposed to anything that might look after the environment in preference to making ever more money are begun to realize that that's not a sustainable long-term solution. And as Christians, we can change the way we think about and the way we treat God's creation. We can do better to treat the world around us with the respect that it deserves. We can change our relationship with the earth and her creatures from one of domination and abuse and exploitation to one of cooperation and respect. We can end the false dualism that we've created in our worldview and recognize that we don't live on the earth, we are part of the earth. And we can relearn the truth that our ancestors knew, that the proper attitude towards the miracle of God's creation is not avarice, it's awe. And this isn't some airy-fairy new kind of spirituality. It's a return to an ancient one. As Meister Eckhart, a 14th century Christian mystic and theologian, wrote, "Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God. If I spent enough time with the tiniest creature, even a caterpillar, I would never have to prepare a sermon. So full of God is every creature." So look around this amazing world with a sense of awe. Go for a walk in a local forest and bathe in the beauty and life there. And then go home and take one action in your household and one action to try and influence our wider society. For example, write a letter to a company who isn't doing all they could do to make their business environmentally healthy. Or write to the mayor about what your city is doing or not doing to protect the environment. Write to your provincial representative or write to the premier about the forestry industry practices in BC. Before you vote in the federal election, look at the platforms of each of the parties on the environment and then tell whichever party you are voting for that you care about the environment and that you expect them to live up to the promises that they have made in this election about improving Canada's environmental impact. At home, pick one thing you could improve on, like stop buying paper towels and use old rags instead, or reduce your garbage by trying to minimize packaging when you make purchases. And if you aren't able to reduce the packaging, tell the store you want to be able to, and so on. There is a little video on our website that you can watch about some of the things that you can do in your own life to help protect our forests. And there'll be one each week during this season with ideas to help protect other parts of our environment over these few weeks. So how about each week pick one thing more than whatever it is you're doing now and make that a part of your life. And when you've got that habit, pick another one. It doesn't have to be huge things that we can't possibly do. We just need to care about the world that we are leaving to the generations to come and do our own part, small as it might seem to be. Because together we do make a difference. And together, we can help care for our common home, God's earth.